Hello and welcome to the new Blue Skies Thinking podcast with the Aviation Preservation Society Scotland, otherwise known as the APSS. 23 years ago, a maverick and imaginative curator of Scotland's National Museum of Flight tasked a group of elderly volunteers with building a vintage World War I biplane from scratch to 1915 plans. It would augment what he saw as a gaping hole in the Great War collection. Almost a quarter of a century on, and the Sopwith 1.5 strutter, which was seminal in the development of combat flight as the war gained pace, is all but ready to fly. Today I'm speaking with Mike Harper, CEO of the APSS, a band of brothers who meet in a shed in East Lothian every week to put this piece of flying history together. Welcome, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Jean.
Okay, let's go for it. First of all, can you tell us just where you are with the Strutter project today?
Well, as it stands, today or tomorrow we'll be having our final inspections by the LAA inspector, who will be counter-signing the checks that Tim Rayner, our LAA inspector, has already done. So the inspections are done twice, if you like, one by two competent inspectors, and signed off, and the paperwork goes into the LAA to confirm that the aircraft is being built properly. So that's where we are at the moment. The aircraft's pretty much 100% done, unless the LAA inspector finds one nut or bolt or something that's in the wrong position. But we wait to find out, and we're very confident that it's going to pass with flying colours. So here we go.
This is kind of contemporary history in the making, history in the sort of the achievements of the APSS, who've been going for many decades now, and I believe began as a band of volunteers with the museum. But 25 years almost in the making here is no mean feat. Is it frustrating at the moment to witness slow progress when you're all ready to watch it go into the skies?
Yeah, I think everybody's got used to waiting. The number of times that we have thought and the number of times we've been asked, when's it going to fly? And over the last few years, maybe since 2018, the stock answer has been next year. We get to 2023, and of course COVID got in the way, and that stalled things quite a lot. But we understand that when you're building an aircraft to fly, there are going to be all sorts of problems that you encounter that you didn't expect. One of them being the propeller that was supplied with the engine that didn't actually do the job it was supposed to, and so we had to fund and have made a propeller tailor-made for the purpose. So that's the sort of thing that we were faced with that was unexpected, and has cost us time. But so we're used to things, setting the program back. But at the same time, these guys have been patient for 20 odd years. What really gets me is the ambition and the vision that these guys had 23 years ago to be able to start making, taking little bits of wood and metal, starting to form the very, very basics of an aircraft. So they're used to it. They're patient.
So let's look at this. Let's look at the genesis of this project, because we're not talking here about qualified, aero engineers.
Yeah, engineers. Yeah,
we're not talking about qualified engineers. What we're talking about here is people that are literally volunteers from all walks of life who've got all different skill sets, presenting themselves in a kind of lunch club every Wednesday and coming along to see what they can contribute. So can you take us to the genesis of this unique project and tell us how it came about?
Well, one of the things you have to remember, first of all, is that the APSS were formed in 1973 by a group of aviation enthusiasts. Like myself, everybody that's joined the APSS has joined for one reason, and that is they love aircraft and flying and anything to do with aircraft. And so there was an ambition with all the guys they wanted to learn these things. They were given the opportunity to join in the build of the strutter, and they grabbed it with both hands because, you know, they might have been a surgeon, they might have been a civil engineer, they might have been a lecturer, they could have been, you know, like myself, an area manager. But everybody had a common interest in aviation and wanted to learn more. And we were fortunate enough in that, with Tim being the LAA inspector but being closely involved in the project, these skills came to us. We either had them or we learned them. And we were able to source other people's abilities, welding and manufacturing. We outsourced some of that to meet the proper criteria. And it all came together because of the ambition and the enthusiasm of these guys.
So would you say that they were all big dreamers or plodders or both?
Oh, very much both. You have to be a plodder in this sort of scenario. We're not turning up 5 days a week to do a job, 9 to 5. The guys are turning up once or twice a week. That's why it's taken so long. It's been a hobby for these guys, but a pretty serious hobby as well. Wanting to see an aircraft in the air like this. If we had built it as an exhibit for the museum, it would have been done in 5 years because it wouldn't have had the strict attention paid to it because it's going to fly.
So how did Adam Smith, who was the curator at the time, how did he have the confidence in these guys? How did he know that they would be up to the job?
Because he was an aviator as well, and he was a true aviation enthusiast. He was the right guy to be running the museum at that time. He created or he established the air shows that brought a lot more footfall to the museum, and he obviously, like all of us, had been to Duxford. They'd seen what was going on there. He felt.
Can you explain what Duxford is?
Well, Duxford is the International War Museum's aviation museum in just near Cambridge, Duxford Airfield in Cambridge. Duxford was a World War II fighter station during the Battle of Britain. Now it's full of our aviation heritage. And they don't just have exhibits there, they actually have live aircraft that they restore and they fly from Duxford. And you can actually go down there and get a shot in one if you've got a few bob.
It's a bit like the Glastonbury of air shows.
Certainly is, absolutely. And there's anything to do with British and international aviation, you'll see it down there. And it's a wonderful mecca for British aviation enthusiasts. And so Adam, his ambition was really just to create something like that here.
Nothing like that in Scotland already?
Well, not really. There are other aviation museums, but there are no other aviation museums wanting to build aircraft to fly them. Now, this was an ambition that came from, I believe, they'd had a few fly-ins with what was then the PFA, which is now the LAA, the Light Aviation Association. So they have a local strut, a group who gather and talk and fly places, and they established fly-ins at the museum, and they were quite successful, which went on to be the air shows. And so it came from Adam Smith's enthusiasm as an aviator and as an aviation enthusiast. And
also a great enthusiasm for First World War working aircraft.
Yeah, exactly, because there wasn't very much to show on the site at the time. Even although the East Fortune site was a Royal Naval Air Station in the First World War, very little on display down over there that would indicate that. And this was one way of resolving that.
So what were some of the challenges on the way that maybe Adam initially faced, but also that the early teams faced? I'm guessing a lot of it was about doing the homework.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of research went into putting this aircraft together. And we also had the benefit of the skills of certain people. For instance, Len Hart is ex-Rolls-Royce. John Guy, although he was a surgeon, he was a very, very keen metal worker as well. He built the dummy machine guns for the aircraft and had a lot to do with the covering of the aircraft and a lot of other parts of it. So it was the ability of the members to come together and take responsibility for building that part or sourcing that part or creating that part, and then they came together. They were the whole process was overseen by Bernard Ginty and Evan Pole.
Bernard, of course, is no longer with us.
He's unfortunately no longer with us, as are quite a number of the guys that started the project. It's so sad that, well, they're not with us, but they are in that aircraft. They are part of that aircraft. Their skills, their time and their effort are part of that aircraft, and there will be a plaque with their names on it on the aircraft as she flies for the first time.
So there were challenges sort of in getting to grips with this machine. It seems that for many years the APSS have been volunteering at the National Museum of Flight in Scotland, and that they had a certain skill set born out of enthusiasm. But this was a whole new ball game, wasn't it?
Yeah. They'd never built an aircraft before. Yeah. And in actual fact, when Adam came up with the idea, the first response was, are they capable of doing this? And it's Tim that tells the story. He said to Adam, well, look, I'll give them a few parts to make, and they can go away and make them, and I'll inspect them, and I'll give them the guidance and any information they need, but it's up to them to produce the goods. And if it's good enough, then we'll take it forward. And so they did, and the parts were produced, and Tim inspected them, and he said to Adam, these guys can build an aircraft.
So the guys were no spring chickens when they started. A lot of them had retired. It was kind of a little bit of a retirement project for some.
Sure, yeah.
And now the mean age is around 80, I would say, 75, 80. Although
Pretty
there
much.
Are new members.
There are newer members coming in now, fortunately, to carry on.
Yeah, but the core team just keep going. So I was going to ask you, what are the physical challenges to putting together a plane? And what does the fact that these guys sustain, even people like Bernard Ginty, who had cancer and was coming into the shed probably a couple of weeks before he died, what are the physical challenges, and what about the tenacity of the guys that keeps them going?
I think you give Bernard as an example. I think the admirable thing is that these guys wanted to be here. I think they had given so much to this project that they wanted to see as much of it through as possible, and that's really, really admirable. We're all getting older. Things do tend to get a little bit more difficult. I know that, for instance, Evan has been with the project since the start, and he's done wonderfully well overseeing the whole project and being involved right in the very centre of it. But he quite rightly has recognised that it's time for somebody else to pick up the gauntlet and carry on. And so,
how old is Evan?
Evan's in his 80s.
So mid-80s.
So yeah, and so he's decided that he would like to be involved from in the background, if you like, as a mentor, guiding. If any questions are asked, he can answer them. He's been there, he's seen it, he's done it. But the newer members coming in, who are around about the same age as Evan was when he started, they're being given the opportunity to step up and carry on the next project. And the next project, which is Assault with Pup, we envisage will not take nearly as long because we've done it all before. And we know exactly what to do, and Evan will be there in the background making sure that it's done right.
But also to bring some perspective about kind of how these guys just keep going. Evan is still very active.
Very much so.
in the SOP with 1.5 strutter.
Sure.
He's still in his overalls every week.
Mm-hmm.
He's not taking a back seat yet.
Oh no. That's the intention is for the pup build, but no, Evan's front and centre.
What does
with
that
the SOP with pup with the strutter?
As a younger member of the team, how does that make you feel when you see people like that, Frank?
Oh, it's inspiring. It really is inspiring because I think I'm around about the age that Evan was when he started the project, and so it gives me a lot of confidence that if I look after myself, like he obviously has, then maybe I'll be doing this in 20 years' time. I hope I am, and I hope we are.
Let's look at the machine as a vehicle for keeping kind of the grey matter active. They were building it from 1915 plans. It was going to be a replica, but they were really keen that most of the parts were as was. Some of the parts have become obsolete. Can you tell us how they brainstormed to get the parts? I believe there were like thousands within the framework, 2,700 and odd little bits.
Yeah.
And they really kind of wouldn't leave the problem alone until they solved it.
They made them. They made the parts. They just like they would have in 100 years ago. They had the plans. They had some examples, and they went away. For instance, I'll give you an example of the throttle quadrant on the aircraft. It's an exact replica of what was on the original aircraft, and Len Hart made it from scratch, because we have guys in the team who have these skills. So these kind of parts were, although they're no longer available, they are. It is possible to make these parts from scratch. But not only that, we were being practical about the whole thing. We knew that we wanted to fly the aircraft and fly it, regularly, and therefore, at the time, going back 20 years, to find an engine, an original strutter type engine, a Leclerc, would be very, very, well, nigh on impossible. In the interim, there's a company in New Zealand making what they call rotary engines, which would suit pups and strutters and things like that. But these engines are very, very, very expensive. The engine that we opted for at the time was called a Rotec engine. It's a radial engine, not a rotary engine. So when you look at the aircraft on the ground with the cowls on it, it looks exactly the same as the original would have looked. The only difference is the configuration and type of engine that's in there. The engine looks the same, but it is different. And it's different in a way that it's a modern engine. It's brand new, manufactured with all the ancillaries that you would have with a modern engine. You have things like alternators, starter motors, electronic ignition. All these things need wiring. In the original aircraft, there were only two wiring circuits, and that was for the spark plugs, if you like. The aircraft that we have has been completely wired to accommodate the modern engine. So there are a lot of circuit breakers and instruments in the cockpit that wouldn't have been in the original one. But we thought of that as well, and we made sure that the modern instrumentation, for instance, if it's on the ground, can be covered up so that you're just looking at a traditional cockpit. It's only when the pilot gets in to fly it that he'll uncover the modern instruments that are needed to monitor the engine while you fly it.
And partly for safety standards now as compared to 100
Sure.
years ago.
Yeah, and that engine theoretically should be a lot easier to maintain than the original rotary type engine. I'm told that the original rotary type engines would need a complete strip down with sort of 8 or 9 hours. I stand to be corrected, but my understanding is you need to completely strip these engines every 9 hours you've run it.
Okay.
That would be cost prohibitive for us.
So tell me more about Tommy Sopwith's machine. What were the main characteristics, and why was she so important for the course of the war?
Well, the strutter, I'm not completely read up on the genesis of the strutter, but I do know that the aircraft was used as an observation platform. In the early days of the First World War, it became important to understand where the enemy was and what they were doing. And the only way you could do that was with barrage balloons, which were stationary and very easy to shoot down, or with aircraft where you could fly over them and find out what they were up to. And so that's really why these aircraft came into being originally, was so that they could go and have a snoop and find out what was going on with the enemy. And of course, the enemy would send planes up as well, and they would shoot at each other with pistols initially, and then they would stick machine guns on them. And that was the sort of development of aviation in the first couple of years of the First World War. Went like that. So you have an aircraft that Tommy Sopwith has designed for the Air Ministry to go in the air and report back using. In those days, they would use spark transmission systems that they could, kind of Morse code that they could hear on the ground. And of course, the guy in the back wasn't able to fly the aircraft. It wasn't dual control. He was a passenger. And so if he was a passenger, he better have a machine gun as well, so that he could defend the aircraft from behind. So you have a forward-facing gun, and the gun on the forward-facing that the pilot used fired through the propeller. It was the very first British aircraft to be able to fire through the propeller using an interrupter gear. The observer in the back seat, he had a Lewis gun on a scarf ring where he could spin round and shoot at anybody that was actually chasing them. So that was the purpose. But the Strutter was a bigger aircraft that was harder to handle. The Germans were producing smaller, more nimble aircraft, and so there was a need for a smaller fighter type aircraft, and that's where the Pup came into being.
And the Pup is the child of the Strutter.
It is. Well, in actual fact, the story goes that down at Kingston Aviation, when they had the Pup's prototype, if you like, it was sat outside a hangar next to a 1.5 Strutter. Now the construction looks the same, but it's just smaller. And one of the generals turned to Tommy Sopwith and said, "Oh, look, your Strutter's had a Pup," and the name stuck.
So let's look at the significance for East Lothian and Scotland. From what I understand, there were Zeppelins and submarines and all sorts, and the Forth needed defence. So whilst people think of these aircraft as going immediately to the front line or to France or whatever, there was a very important role they had in at home, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. And in actual fact, people don't realise that although it's a British aircraft, more of them were actually built in France. The reason being that if they were building them here, they were just having to ship them to France to do what they needed them to do. There were a number of them here, but not nearly as many because, you didn't need them here. But obviously with, Edinburgh was bombed by a Zeppelin. The Forth estuary was penetrated by Zeppelins, and the target was the Forth Bridge and Rosyth. So the Strutters were used along with other aircraft in a defence role, and that's why they flew out of East Fortune.
And can you tell us about the historic landing on an aircraft carrier in the Forth that maybe people aren't too aware of? This was also another reason.
Yeah, this is my favourite story, to be honest. The aircraft, in actual fact, early on we decided to dedicate this aircraft to Richard Bell Davis, who was the first aviator to successfully land and take off from a flush deck ship. That's how they described this. This was the new concept of aircraft. The word aircraft carrier didn't come along until later. They had ships, and Strutters and other aircraft were flying off of ships, but they weren't able to fly back onto them again. They would actually have to ditch in the sea beside them and then recover the pilot and hopefully the aircraft. So it was very costly, but the Navy had seen the value in aviation because you could only see as far over the horizon as a man could get up a mast. But if you had an aircraft on board and you could send him up and get some height, he could see much, much further and report back. So that's why I think the Navy saw the value in aircraft. Now, the goal was to be able to launch and recover an aircraft without it landing in the sea. And And a very, very brave naval pilot called Edwin Dunning was the very first man to be able to land an aircraft on a ship. He was credited with landing on the front deck of a ship that had a flying deck built out the front of it, but it still had a superstructure. And he would have to fly alongside the ship and then duke in and land the aircraft. A bit like the Harriers and the F-35s do in the Navy nowadays. They fly alongside the ship and then they move sideways to land it. Now, he was the first person to actually do that, but unfortunately, on his third attempt, because of the amount of wind being pushed off the superstructure, the bridge of the ship, it blew him over the side. There's a famous picture of his colleagues trying to grab the underside of the wing as it went over, and even film of that happening. And unfortunately, he was knocked out and drowned. And so, after his third attempt, it was basically, he lost his life. So he's credited quite rightly with the very first man to land on a ship, but it wasn't a practical solution, and it made the Navy think twice about the way they were going about this. They decided that what they needed was a ship with a flush deck, with no superstructure on it, that would cause this to happen. And so around about the same time, towards the end of the First World War, there was a ship being built in the Clyde for an Italian liner. It's called the Conta Rossa. And that ship was commandeered, and they put a flush deck on her, and they commissioned her as HMS Argus, and they sailed her around to the Fourth Estuary. And this was the first attempt. It was basically, the Argus was our first, or the world's first, aircraft carrier. And Richard Bell Davis was one of the best aviators in the Navy at the time. He was chosen to do the first landings and takeoffs. And his aircraft of choice was the 1.5 Strutter, his favourite aircraft. And so he chose that aircraft. He took off from Turnhouse Airport in Edinburgh. It's now Edinburgh Airport. And he flew over the Fourth Estuary, found the HMS Argus and landed successfully on her. And then they turned her around and he took off again, and then he landed and he took off and he landed, and his colleagues did the same, and they proved the concept. That was the first aircraft carrier.
So this is seminal in modern warfare.
Absolutely.
This is kind of real history in the making, and undoubtedly has changed the way wars have gone since. A reason for the Strutter remaining in Scotland.
Absolutely. And we have a tangible link to that history as well. Next week, in actual fact, Richard Bell Davis's grandson, Richard Bell Davis, will be visiting with his wife Prue to see the Strutter as she's just about ready to fly. And he's bringing along with him some memorabilia, his flight logs and his pilot licenses and his miniature medals, including the VC that he won during the First World War. And so we're very much looking forward to welcoming them. And we've already had other members of the family visiting. We've had Richard Bell Davis's great-great-great-grandson and daughter in the cockpit of the aircraft a couple of years ago. So we have this wonderful link with the family of the man that we are remembering through this aircraft.
An incredible continuation of history that began decades.
Yes, and it's a story that we desperately want to tell, because people don't realise that the aircraft carrier was invented and proved in Scotland.
So let's just kind of go back to the essence of this project. This wasn't just about building a life-size sort of boy's own aircraft. It's since been described as a men's shed on steroids. That's a quote. And I think that beyond the history of the Great War, the Strutter has had a huge role in preserving the health of these folk that are coming in every week, but also in showing how keeping the brain ticking over keeping the mind interested in things. They've kind of overturned the concept of retirement, and I'm just wondering if you can explain what you've seen about the importance of this because again, you are one of the younger ones, but you've been, how long have you been in this project now?
I've been with them for nearly 8 years.
Yeah. So when you came in, you've been watching what's happened.
Yeah, I came to it from a different angle. Basically, I've always followed the project. I knew of the project's existence since day one, being an aviation enthusiast and regularly visiting East Fortune, the museum. So I knew about it, and I would talk to the guys. And it wasn't until I found myself in a position where I was self-employed. I'd been self-employed for a few years. And I was able to take a day off every week, ask the boss, yeah, okay. I was able to come down here on a Wednesday, although I was still self-employed, I was able to give a day a week. So my experience of this has been different to the experience of a lot of the guys who come to it after retirement, but I can understand. You hear all these stories from years ago where people would retire from many, many, many years of work and all of a sudden have had no plans and find themselves terribly lonely, terribly frustrated, not knowing what to do because they don't have a job of work to go to. And it's such a shame. And I think nowadays people are getting more involved in different projects when they retire. You know, some people say when you retire you find yourself a nice little easy job to do, and other people have lots and lots of hobbies to do, and this is just one of them. You know, there are people come to us who have the enthusiasm and have the interest in aviation. Some people go to men's sheds and they do other things like woodworking and metalworking and what have you. This is an aviation men's shed. That's basically it. So it's you know, what's your favourite subject? You know, if it's aviation, come here.
But at the same time, you know, they're not they are actually building little models as well, because I've seen some of them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is a unique project. Aircraft are being built across the country, across the world, I guess, but not by people of this vintage. What were your first impressions when you walked into the shed and you saw what they'd done?
Well, the thing is, what caused me to join initially was seeing the engine sitting in a corner that had just been purchased, ready to go on the aircraft, and that's my area of interest. I'm an engineer, and so you know, I'm not that. I can do woodwork, but not to the standards of building aircraft. I can do metal work, but not to the standards of building aircraft. But I can. I understand how an engine works, and I understand. I come from an electrical background, and so I understand how the electrics and electronics work. And so I felt that I had something to share, and I was invited to join because of that. But I have other skills and my ability to organise and do lots of things behind the scenes to make sure that things were running properly. And you know, next thing I know, I was the secretary, and then I became the chairman. And it's a privilege to be in this position, to see what these guys are capable of doing, and to be part of it and to help do it. And be involved. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And these guys, that's why they turn up, because it is such a unique project, and it is such a you won't find this in any other town. This is totally unique, and it's a story to be told.
So the machine is clearly more than the sum of its parts, but the sum of its parts isn't to be overlooked, because there's a place in here for everybody, isn't there? And it's very much about teamwork, isn't it?
Without a doubt. And I've said this for a while now. We don't necessarily need 8 people that are capable of building planes. What we need people from all walks. We need people who have accounting skills. We need people with people that could do shows and events outside. people that, bring in different administrative skills to bear. We need all sorts of stuff like that. It's not just about building an aircraft. Because we're becoming involved with in STEM projects with schools and with colleges.
Can you say what STEM is?
STEM subjects basically involve anything to do with science, technology, engineering and maths. It's a buzzword at the moment, I'm glad to say, because I've been banging on for years about the German system and where they take vocational learning a lot more seriously than they have in this country over the last 20 years. And I'm glad to say nowadays the governments have been picking up on STEM. There's a STEM ambassador organisation in the UK, which is government run and backed, and it involves people who are in industry or in universities going into schools and encouraging pupils and igniting that spark. If you have a pupil or a youngster who's interested or find themselves interested in anything to do with science, technology, engineering and maths, then these sort of sessions are the ones that bring it out in them and create that spark and get them more interested and let them understand that they are capable.
I kind of want to come back to all of that aspect because I think before we finish the podcast, I want to look at the future. I just have another couple of questions really about the progression of the last, 25 years. We did touch on the fact that some of the volunteers didn't make it to see the plane completed.
Yeah.
It's a huge sadness. I'm just wondering, there are plans, aren't there, to honour them, and I'm sure that their families will continue to keep pace with this. What are the plans that you have to kind of keep their names alive?
Well, these the guys who contributed to the Sopwith Strutters project, who are no longer with us but have actually built or worked on various parts of the aircraft, their names are going on a brass plaque, and that brass plaque is going into the observer's position in the aircraft. And so when Tim takes off for the first time, these guys will be with her.
And that brass plaque is made by new members of the APSS.
It is, absolutely. It's wonderful, isn't it?
So just to look a little bit into some of the other obstacles, we're aware that it's not been without incident. This machine that just started in the mind of Adam Smith and seemed like it was possibly just a case of people coming in and building the machine, but there have been other dramas. The museum which commissioned the machine in the year 2000 ultimately, with the change of directorship, asked you guys to leave. What was the impact of that and how did you overcome it?
The impact was massive. I'm not going to say. I think having come to this or joined the APSS as it was going on, but not being there at the start of the issues that they had with the museum, it's very difficult to comment on who was right and who was wrong.
Can I just bring some perspective to this?
Sure.
Initially, the museum, let me know if I've got this right, the museum and Adam Smith commissioned the aircraft in the year 2000. They gave you a shed on the site of the National Museum of Flight, and I think £5,000 was given and £50-ish a month
plans,
to pay for electricity, etc.,
Yep.
etc.
Yep.
It was, in a sense, a perfect place to be because that was where the original squadrons of the Strutter were stationed.
Yeah.
So can you take over from there and explain?
Well, the APSS sold a couple of their own the aircraft that the APSS actually owned and were exhibits at the Museum of Flight, and they got, I think it was something like £60,000 for the aircraft that they sold to finance the Sopwith Strutter project. So the project itself was financed, but it was a nice gesture of the museum to take some money out of their budget and fund it as a supporting gesture, if you like. But and they worked for years and years with the project, and it would be open on air show days and on specific days and holidays. The members would be in, and the public would come in, and consistently the visitors book, if somebody chose to sign it, if you read it, it all said the most interesting thing in the site, because they were
in
the museum, because they
National
were
Museum.
seeing guys, and it's like Duxford. I know from my experience going down there to talking to guys that are working on aircraft, it's lovely. And this is the sort of experience that visitors to the museum got, and they really loved it. And I remember as a visitor myself going into the radio and radar section and talking to one of the guys who knew exactly how the gyroscopic gun sight worked and its history. And I went home absolutely buzzing, because this was something that I had no idea about. It was built in Edinburgh. And in actual fact, I've got one now. I went out and found one and bought one. And they had a section for the radio and radar that told you everything you needed to know about them. They had guys that worked for Ferranti employees who knew everything there was to know about them. And yet the museum just chose to shut it down on a whim because it didn't meet their design or their display standards, unfortunately.
So from what I can gather, the reason given was that there was inadequate space and you were told to leave. Now,
that was the Strutter project, yes. And we shut down our radio and radar section as well.
This is around about 2018, as I remember.
Mm.
So
17, yeah.
the impact of that, you've got a bunch of people, let's say over 75, being told you have to leave. There's a half or 3/4 finished plane there.
Mm.
And what is required is a new premises urgently.
Mm.
And the wherewithal to continue when you've been given such a body blow.
It just proves how resilient and ambitious these guys are. We're not giving in.
What did they do?
We managed through other members to find a new home to continue the project. We grouped together and we brought friends in, and we spent 2 weekends moving from the museum into the building that we're in now. We were very lucky finding this building. It was one of our oldest members, who unfortunately has just recently passed away, knew the owner of the building and let us know about it, and it came up just at the right time. There have been so many occurrences of things that have just saved us in time. For instance, if we hadn't had to leave the museum, if COVID hadn't come along, this project would have been finished 4 years ago. I've got no doubt about that. That's how far it set us back. Because when we moved, it wasn't a case of just carrying on building the aircraft. We had to re-establish our base and build it. We couldn't build an aircraft unless we built a building to build the aircraft in. So we had to create the workshops. We had to organise everything that had come from the museum that we owned and put it into the right place. And it took months and months and months to get all that organised before we could get back to building the Strutter. So that set us back enormously, but we kept on going. And
Lots of people would have given up.
Yeah, they would have. But we turned up every week, and there was always something else to get our teeth into. There was never any. Nobody gave up hope. We were determined to crack on with it, and everybody was, galvanized. They were heading in the same direction. So, with that, we find ourselves today in a building that has for some time now our rent has been paid by an anonymous benefactor. Nobody knows who it is, and this very, very kind person has been paying our rent for the last 2-3 years. And if it wasn't for that person, we would not be here. We would have run out of money by now. But I think the strength of our story and our determination has has given us the support. The people see what we're trying to achieve. People see what we've already achieved, and they're willing to invest in us and support us.
So let's look at where we are now. You've got this glittering machine, basically, that to all intents and purposes, apart from inspection, which it has to jump through these hoops.
Absolutely.
It's in a secret airfield location in Scotland now, and about to be engine run and tested to exacting standards. Almost ready to fly. Really exciting. First of all, what do you feel about the prospect of it being in the air? But let's not forget that there are other huge obstacles facing the APSS and its longevity. So can we address both of those? First of all, how will you feel to see it fly?
Well, I think there are going to be a lot of guys there with tears in their eyes and a real sense of pride in their achievement, quite rightly. I think it's wonderful. It'll be wonderful to observe that. You're right in that our future is by no means secure at the moment. We would love to raise £200,000. Now, that sounds like a hell of a lot of money, but, when you look at what we've done so far, we need to buy this building, we need to develop inside it. And the reason we need to do that is so that we can create more value in the community, so that we can support people, we can teach them about the heritage of the aircraft, we can teach them skills that we can pass on. We can inspire youngsters all through visits to our facility and what we've done here. So that's the future. Nobody knows how this is going to happen because we are pinning our hopes on when that aircraft gets in the air. It's going to bring a lot of attention and a lot of publicity, and with that, we might get the interest of people who would like to support us.
So the vision of Adam Smith for a kind of living, breathing, working, flying machine is almost there.
It's almost there.
But the kind of second blow that you have from the museum has almost strengthened your resolve to not only have a machine, but to have a heritage centre in this region of enormous historical significance for the strutter, and to build other machines like a Stop with Pup, which is you've already got the frame for that, to reach out into the community and extend these skills that will die with the generations.
I mean, the thing is, what you have to understand is we're not going to just teach people the skills of people 100 years ago. The skills involved in putting this aircraft together are contemporary skills. They're skills that can be applied to all sorts of things in modern times. So it's not necessarily about reliving the past. It's about inspiring people to get involved in areas of work or hobby or whatever that actually they maybe didn't know was possible. So that's there are many aspects to the APSS. A lot of it's to do with education. A lot of it is to do with inspiring people. A lot of it is to build aircraft and other things, flight simulators, media studios to educate people. These are all things that are starting to develop within this organisation. Now, the one thing I would want to stress at this point is the fact that we talked about the museum, and we've talked about the fact that we had to leave the museum, but we are, I'm finding that we both have our individual values in that we can work very easily side by side. We're not competing with the museum, and the museum's not competing with us, because we have two completely different things to offer the public. And we can work hand in hand. We can certainly develop hand in hand. We we have the facilities and the skills here to inspire people, and you know, that in itself is something that's unique.
And the new administration at the museum seems sympathetic to this also.
Oh yeah, I mean we're in contact with the people in the museum all the time. We always had a really good working relationship with the people on site at the museum. We enjoyed our time there. We valued them, they valued us. It's just a shame that the people at the very top didn't share that.
So to keep this project alive, without mincing words, we need funds and we need volunteers.
Spot on. And the volunteers are coming, and we'd be happy to take more. As we develop the types of jobs and the tasks and the projects and the things that we're going to be doing, outside events, for instance, and being involved with schools and colleges, building more aircraft, building flight simulators, all that sort of stuff. You know, we have a really interesting future ahead of us, as long as we get the support that's needed.
And what do you say to the naysayers who said it would never happen, who said that the guys were too old?
Watch this space. No, you're never too old. And you hear that all the time as well. And it is absolutely true. You know, these guys are willing to turn up and crack on. And the thing is, I've found, you know, there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of life experience in this building. And these guys, when I think back, I sometimes say I would like to meet myself when I was 18 years old so that I could give myself a good talking to. Because, you know, you get to this age and you think, with the life experience that you have a hell of a lot to offer. And every single one of these guys is the same.
Well, thank you, Mike, for a fascinating talk about the power of big dreams and never letting go. And like you say, let's watch this space.
Thanks,
or
Jean.
airspace.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot.